Hey everyone, welcome back. I am Dipayan Ghosh, and today we are going to talk about Saturn transit that is going to feel very different from usual Saturn transit discussion that you hear in astrology. Well, this transit, it's almost 1 month now because it has happened in July 27, I think. And I am not making videos for a few days just because I was a little bit sick, and also I was preparing for something to do, to set up all my things for making videos and everything, because it was not set it up because my microphone was not good enough. Many of you guys have commented that please fix your microphone, please fix your microphone. So I have to do all that things, and there was also some family stuffs. So anyway, I am back. So let's talk about Saturn transit. Okay. All right. So Saturn is retrograding in Pisces. Okay. And when Saturn turns retrograde, the things that you thought were finished may suddenly return. The responsibilities you thought you had escaped may come back onto your attention. Old decisions can demand correction. Own professional situation can reopen. Financial leaks that you ignored can become impossible to ignore. And even relationships, beliefs, routine and responsibilities that you thought were already settled can suddenly come back onto the table. And this is why I like to describe the Saturn 2026 retrograde as a great cosmic audit. Imagine like that your life is a massive accounting system. Okay, every decision you have made has created an entry. Every responsibilities you have avoided have has been placed into a pending file. Every shortcuts you took has created a structural weakness somewhere. Every promise you made and failed to complete has remained somewhere in the ledger. And every genuine effort that you made with discipline and integrity has also been recorded. Now, Saturn comes back with the ledger. It does not care about your excuses, it does not care about appearances, it does not care about how successful you looked from the outside. Saturn wants to know one thing: is the structure actually strong? Because that is what represents. So that is what Saturn represents: structure. What I mean to say: time, responsibility, discipline, karma, consequences. Eventually, karma and consequences are the same thing, just a bit difference. Okay. Uh, and during this particular retrograde, Saturn enters a very unusual psychological environment because it is retrograding through Pisces. Okay, a sign that represents dissolution, spirituality, imagination, surrender, and boundaries between what is real and what is merely imagined. Saturn wants concentrate reality. Pisces wants to dissolve boundaries. Saturn wants definition. Pisces can operate through ambiguity. Saturn wants evidence. Pisces can operate through faith. So, this entire retrograde creates a very interesting tension. Structure meets dissolution, reality meets imagination, responsibility meets escapism. And this is exactly why the Saturn retrograde of 2026 can become such a significant period of correction. Because if something in your life is real, Saturn can strengthen it. If something has only been surviving because you have been avoiding reality, this transit can expose it. This is not necessarily a period of punishment. Okay, this is that distinction is extremely important. Saturn is not coming to destroy your life simply because you made mistakes. Saturn is coming to show you which parts of your life needs to rebuild properly. There is a difference between destruction and correction. Understand this. Sometimes something has to be dismantled because it has never structurally sound in the first place. And sometimes something you needs reinforcement. That is the central philosophy behind the entire retrograde. Now, technically, Saturn begins its retrograde on July 27, 2026, depending on the local timing and astrological reference being used, and continues until around December 11, I think. Yeah. So, I think it's approximately 138 days of Saturn moving retrograde, and throughout this period, Saturn remains on sidereal Pisces, also known as Meena Rashi. So the retrograde moving takes Saturn backward approximately 20 degrees and 36 minutes of Pisces towards 13 degrees and 47 minutes of Pisces. Now, if you're thinking that this is simply an astronomical optical illusion, modern astronomy would describe as retrograde motion in that way. But see, from Earth's perspective, from Earth's POV, okay, because of the relative orbital motion between Earth and Saturn, Saturn appears to move backward against the background stars. But in Jyotish, we don't simply look at whether the planet is physically moving backward through space, okay, astronomically, not astrologically. Okay, Jyotish is astrology. Astronomy is astronomy. Astronomy is something you go to the or go to space and find out what's happening. But astrology is what we are living, right? Like, for an example, we are living in Earth. It's not an example. We actually live in Earth. So we see whatever is happening in space from our perspective, whatever it is, that is meant to affect us. Okay. So we also pay attention to Chestabala, the emotional strength of this planet. And retrograde motion changes how the planetary energy operates. A retrograde Saturn not necessarily becomes weaker. In many traditional interpretation, it becomes more internally concentrated. Its significant its significance turns inward. The planet begins asking you to review, reconsider, and revise. And that is why the same Saturn that normally represents external responsibility can become intensely psychological during retrograde motion. You begin examining things that you previously ignored. You being asked. You begin asking yourself whether the career you built is actually sustainable or not, whether your financial habits are actually healthy or not, whether the relationship you maintain are genuinely reciprocal or not, whether your spiritual beliefs are authentic or not, whether the routines you follow are helping you or slowly damaging you, whether the success you are chasing is actually worth the price you are paying or not. So Saturn doesn't simply ask whether something looks successful or not. Saturn asks whether it can survive time. That is the difference. Saturn can look impressive for 6 months. Saturn can look successful for 2 years. But Saturn is interested in what happens after 10 years, after 20 years, after 30 years. That is why Saturn lessons often feel very slow. Saturn is not interested in temporary results, my friend. It is interested in permanence. And when this planet retrogrades through Pisces, the question becomes even more complicated because Pisces can create dreams, beautiful dreams, spiritual dreams, creative dreams, emotional dreams. But Saturn asks whether those dreams have a structure or not. It asks whether you have actually built something capable of carrying the dream. You may have vision for your future, but do you have a routine for that? You may have financial freedom, but do you have savings? You may want successful business, but do you have proper systems? You may want to have a peaceful relationship, but do you have boundaries? You may want spiritual growth, but can you actually willing to sit alone with your own mind? That is the actual conflict between Saturn and Pisces. And this is why one of the biggest themes of this retrograde is separating realistic dreams from vague escapism. Pisces can sometimes allow us to remain inside possibilities without committing to reality we imagine. We hope, we visualize, we tell ourselves that things will eventually work out, but Saturn eventually asks that what have you actually done? And that question can be uncomfortable because during this retrograde, vagueness becomes expensive. If you don't know where your money is going, Saturn may force you to look that see your money is going there. If you don't know what's your career direction is, Saturn may force you to make decisions. If you don't know, like, your relationship, if your relationship exists inside an undefined space, Saturn may demand clarity. If you have unfinished paperwork, Saturn may bring it back. If you have abundant project, Saturn may put it directly in front of you again. This is the nature of the cosmic audit. And there is another extremely important factor protecting this transit is Jupiter. During this period, Jupiter is exalted in Cancer. I have made videos on that before. You can watch it. So, and from Cancer, Jupiter, Jupiter aspects is Jupiter ninth aspect directly is on to Pisces, and this creates what can be described as corridor of divine insulation. This is incredibly important because Saturn's pressure does not necessarily operate in complete illusion. Jupiter's influence provides wisdom, guidance, protection, and the possibility of understanding the lesson rather than simply suffering through it. Think about this like Saturn is the auditor, Jupiter is the advisor sitting beside you. Saturn like saying you that this is wrong, correct this thing. But Jupiter says that this is how you can correct it wisely. That distinction can completely change the experience of this transit. For people who have been acting with integrity, who have genuinely worked hard, who have tried to fulfill their responsibilities, Jupiter's influence can Jupiter's influence can soften some of Saturn's harshness. It does not necessarily remove the work, it makes the work meaningful. And that is very important, distinction. Saturn does not promise an easy life. Saturn promise that the sincere effort eventually becomes structure. So if you spent years building something honestly, this retrograde can actually become a period where the foundation is reinforced. You may discover that something you thought was falling is actually being prepared for a much stronger future. You may have to revise the structure. You may have to slow down. You may have to redo certain things. But the purpose is not necessarily to take in the achievement away. The purpose is to make capable of lasting. This becomes even more interesting when we examine two different phases of this retrograde. Because Saturn does not remain psychologically identical throughout all 138 days. There is a major shift in nakshatra environment too. The first phase runs through Revati Nakshatra. The second phase moves into Uttara Bhadrapada Nakshatra. These two phases will tell you very different stories. The first phase begins around July 26 and continues until approximately around October 10, and that is Revati cycle. Revati is ruled by Mercury. Revati carries a very interesting symbolism because it's associated with journey, completion, guidance, movement, and bringing things towards their destination. So during the first phase of this Saturn retrograde, the audit is like heavily connected with mental processing. This is the phase of closure, and the mind starts going backward. You remember unfinished projects, old conversation, abundant plans, things you promised yourself you would complete, courses you started but never finished, application you never followed up on, documents you never submitted, peoples you never contacted again, and suddenly those things return. It can feel, almost uncanny. You may receive a message from someone you haven't spoken to for years, and old professional contact may suddenly appear. A previous opportunity may come back. A project that you abandoned may suddenly become relevant again. This is not random within the symbolism of the transit. Saturn retrograde is reviewing the pending file, and Revati is asking you to finish the journey. So the first phase is less about completely rebuilding your life and the more about identifying what has remained incomplete. What did you have, what did you leave unfinished? What did you avoid? What did you postpone? And what did you mentally close without actually resolving? This become the question of the first phase. And then something very important happens around October 10, is that Saturn moving backward towards Uttar Bhadrapada Nakshatra. And that is the major shift, because Uttar Bhadrapada Nakshatra is Saturn's own nakshatra. Saturn is essentially entering its own territory. The intensity of this retrograde can therefore become much more internal and structural. The audit moves deeper, and during Revati Nakshatra, you are closing files, and during Uttara Bhadrapada, you are rebuilding the building itself. So, this is where the retrograde can begin to feel more internally pressurized. You may suddenly, realize that certain parts of your life cannot simply be patched anymore. They need fundamental reconstruction. Your routine may need to change, your financial structure may need to change, your professional systems may need to change, your boundaries may need to change, your relationship with responsibility itself may need to change. And this is why October 10 becomes such an important pivot point for within this transit. So before October 10, the question is, what remains unfinished? After the pivot, the question becomes, what needs to be fundamentally rebuilt? This distinction is incredibly useful when you're trying to understand your personal experience with this retrograde, because Saturn is not famous for bringing the past back, but the past doesn't always return as a person. Sometimes it returns as a problem, sometimes it returns as a document, sometimes it returns as a financial obligation, sometimes it does as a emotional pattern, sometimes it's as a, it returns as a professional responsibility, and sometimes it returns simply as a realization. You suddenly understand that something you thought was finished never actually was. This is why one of the most common manifestation of this retrograde can be forgotten paperwork, tax notices, loan gaps, lapsed registration, property documentation, contracts. Anything that was signed off casually may suddenly require attention. The philosophy here is very Saturnian. If your signature is on it, your responsibility is attached to it. That is what I mean to say. And Saturn retrograde can make those responsibilities visible again. The same principle applies professionally. Imagine, like, you submitted a project some months ago. You thought that it was done, but perhaps the work was rushed. Maybe there was errors, maybe documentation was incomplete, maybe relied on shortcuts during this retrograde. That project may that project may come back. You may be asked to redo it, you may have to correct the work, you may have to revisit something you thought was already behind you. This is the rework mandate of Saturn. And if this happens, don't immediately think that Saturn is punishing you. Instead, ask yourself what the original work was missing. Because Saturn's question is not, why are you being forced to do this again? Saturn's question is, why wasn't it done properly at the first time? That is the lesson. There can also be a return of past people, for former mentors, old professional contracts, siblings, neighbors, previous colleagues, people with whom you had unresolved disputes. And once again, the purpose is not necessarily to bring those people back permanently. Sometimes they return simply because there is something unfinished business between you two. Saturn wants closure, okay? Real closure, not pretending that something never happened. It's not suppressing resentment, not avoiding the conversation, but actual resolution. Okay, and this becomes particularly important in relationships because Saturn is always interested in sustainability. A relationship can survive on attraction for a while, it can survive on excitement for a while, it can it can survive responsibility. Can two people maintain healthy boundaries? Can they communicate honestly? Can they carry each other's responsibility without one person constantly becoming the caretaker of other? Can both people say no when necessary? Can this become questions become these questions become increasingly important during this retrograde. And because Pisces is involved, emotional boundaries become particularly important. Pisces can create enormous compassion, but compassion without boundaries can become exhaustion. You can support someone without sacrificing yourself completely. You can care for someone without becoming responsible for every emotion they experience. You can be compassionate without allowing people to continuously drain you. Saturn retrograde teaches the difference. This is why spiritual solitude also becomes an important theme. There is a difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is the feeling that nobody understands you. Solitude is the deliberate decision to spend time with yourself so that you can understand yourself better. Pisces encourages inner reflection. Saturn gives that reflection structure. Together, they can create an extremely powerful period for deep inner work. And this can be a time to examine your shadow ledger. This can be this thing you don't normally want to admit. The habits are unhealthy. The emotional patterns you repeat, the fears you keep avoiding, okay, the responsibilities that you keep postponing, the financial decision are creating instability, the relationships where you keep saying yes when you actually want to say no. These are the hidden entries in the ledger, and Saturn is asking you to clean them. Okay, now let's bring all of this down from a collective level onto your individual horoscope, because the same Saturn retrograde does not affect every ascendant in the same way. Okay, like for an example, for Aries Ascendant. Okay, so for Aries Ascendant, Saturn is retrograding through 12th house. This is a very deeply internal placement. The 12th house represents expenses, foreign environment, isolation, sleep, hospitals, subconscious pattern, and things that happen behind the visible surface of your life. So for Aries Ascendant, this retrograde can feel like an audit of the mind's back room. Things that you normally don't think about during this day may become impossible to ignore. Old expenses may return. Money leaks can become visible. Financial decisions connected to foreign dealings or institutional environments may require review. You may discover that your money disappearing through small recurring expenses that seemed harmless individually but have become significant collectively. This is exactly what kind of thing Saturn wants you to identify. Not because one subscription will destroy your life, but because Saturn teaches you that structural instability is often created by some leaks repeated over time. Okay, for Aries Ascendant, sleep is also becomes very extremely important because your mind becomes overloaded with responsibilities. Your physical structure can begin reflecting that pressure. The solitude is not the panic. Okay, it is to simplify. Audit recurring subscriptions, review EMIs, look at expenses that you have ignored, trace where money has been leaving, and perhaps most importantly, take sleep seriously. So during this transit, rest is not laziness, it is a maintenance. And if you can identify and correct these leaks before October, the deeper sounds phase of the retrograde can become much easier to manage. Okay, Now let's talk about Taurus Ascendant. So for Taurus Ascendant, stories become, story changes dramatically. Saturn is activating the 11th house. Alright. Now 11th house is a house of gains, networks, social circles, ambitions and long-term objectives. And Saturn holds an especially important role for Taurus because it functions as yoga karaka. So it is not simply a period of loss. It can become a period of restructuring your definition of success. Saturn asks, are your gains are sustainable? Are the people around you genuinely contributing your long-term growth? Are your professional networks based upon real value or temporary appearances? Some old professional contracts may return. Okay. uh, a mentor from a past may reappear. An opportunity that seemed dead may suddenly come back, but Saturn is unlikely to give you an instant results. This is slow luck. The slow luck is still luck. Okay, it simply requires patience. You may need to you know renegotiate rather than cancel. You may need to revise the terms of an opportunity. You may need to rebuild trust with someone you previously worked with, and financially be careful about lending money that you need to receive back before December. The lesson is not simply about earning, it is about retaining, because Saturn wants your gains to become stable assets rather than temporary movements of prosperity. Okay, now let's talk about Gemini Ascendant. Saturn moves through 10th house of karma bhava. Okay, and this can make the retrograde particularly significant for career. Your professional reputation comes under review. Work that you delivered carelessly may return. A project that you assumed was finished may require corrections. A professional promise may need to be fulfilled. And this is where Saturn's principle becomes extremely clear. You're not being judged on brilliance alone. You are being judged on consistency. It is not enough to have a brilliant month and then disappear for 3 months. Saturn wants reliability. It wants repeatable quality. It wants systems. Okay, so if you are Gemini Ascendant, this is a period where doing fewer things but doing them exceptionally well can produce better results than trying to maintain 10 different projects simultaneously. Let your work speak louder than your words. And if you are sloppy, and if there is any sloppy signatures on your professional files, this is the time to correct them. All right. Now for Cancer Ascendants, Saturn retrogrades through 9th house. This brings the audit into territory of dharma, beliefs, higher education, mentors, teachers, fathers, long distance travels, and philosophical direction. And there is an additional layer of protection here, because Jupiter, your ascendant lord, is exalted in Cancer and uh, aspects Pisces. So there is a divine insulation where there is a divine insulation we discussed earlier. The pressure remains, but the potential for wisdom becomes stronger. For Cancer Ascendant, Saturn may ask whether your beliefs are actually your own or not. Have you genuinely developed your philosophy of life, or have you simply inherited beliefs from family, teachers, society? You may also find yourself returning to unfinished education, an abundant course, a certification, an examination, a spiritual practice that you once began and then abandoned. The retrograde can bring these unfinished journeys back to your awareness. So complete them. Don't force outcomes. Trust the process. And if you are planning long distance travel during this period, double check your documents carefully. Saturn loves paperwork, especially paperwork that people assume they don't need to check twice. Okay. Now for Leo ascendants, Saturn moving through 8th house, and this is one of the most intense position. The 8th house is a house of hidden things becomes visible. debts, financial shared finances, insurance, inheritance, secrets, psychological patterns, transformation, etc. etc. So for Leo ascendants, this can feel like an audit of the shadow ledger. Financial shortcuts may come back for review, hidden obligations can become visible, old emotional issues can resurface, and unexpected expenses may appear if something has been neglected for too long. So, this is not a time for speculative financial shortcuts. It is certainly not the time for getting rich quickly or quick thinking. The eighth house teaches transformation through reality. Okay, if something is fragile, Saturn wants you to know now rather than later. So finalize pending property or inheritance paperwork, review hidden debts, check your insurance, look at financial commitments that you may have been ignoring. And emotionally remember that bitterness is often a sign that a transformation has not yet been accepted. The purpose of this period is not to remain trapped inside what happens in this past. It is to emerge stronger because of it. Okay? For Virgo ascendants, Saturn retrogrades through 7th house, and this brings the entire audit directly into your partnerships, marriages, business partnerships, contracts, agreements, anything involved another person becomes a testing ground. Saturn asks a very simple question: is this partnership actually fair? Not emotionally fair, but not emotionally fair in the moment, but structurally fair. Are responsibility divided properly? Are expectations clearly communicated? Are agreements are documented? Are both people contributing? Or has one person slowly become responsible for everything? Vague agreements can begin leaking during this period. So written contracts become much more important. Verbal promises may not be enough. In personal relationships, old grievances may return, but don't automatically interpret that as the end of the relationship. It is the end of the relationship. Sometimes an old grievance return because it was never properly resolved. Treat it as a data. Listen more than you argue, and understand that Saturn is not asking you for perfection. Saturn is asking you for maturity. Okay? For Libra ascendants, Saturn retrogrades through 6th house, and 6th house governs daily routines, health, debts, service, competition, and workplace dynamics. Saturn naturally understands this environment. So Libra ascendants may find themselves, structuring their daily lives. Old health concerns can return. Problem involving the knees or spine may require attention. Workplace stress may become impossible to ignore. Small loans need to be cleared. And the answer is not avoidance, it is methodical action. If there is a structural issue with your body that you have postponed addressing, take it seriously. If you have small lingering debt, start clearing them. If you have routine is if your routine is chaotic, create consistency. Saturn rewards repetition. A small healthy habit performed every day can become more powerful than than an intense routine that lasts only 1 week. And this principle is going to be especially important during this second phase of retrograde. Okay? For Scorpio Ascendant, Saturn retrogrades through 5th house. This brings attention towards children, creativity, romance, education, and speculative intelligence. Saturn does not like shortcuts in the 5th house. Built purely Creative projects built purely around trends may slowly down. Okay? Speculative activities become risky. Quick profits become less attractive compared with sustainable development. But there is also a beautiful opportunity here. An abundant creative project may return. Something you started previously but never completed may suddenly become viable. So the key is patience. If you have children, Their education may require more supervision and discipline. In romantic relationships, maturity becomes more important than excitement. And financially, stay away from speculative gambling disguised as investment. Saturn wants process, not shortcuts, not luck, but process. Okay. For Sagittarius Ascendant, Saturn retrogrades through 4th house, and this becomes an audit for your internal fortness. The 4th house governs home, property, mother, emotional peace, vehicles, and inner stability. You may discover property documentation issues, repairs that have been postponed may suddenly require attention. Domestic tensions may return, and matters and matters concerning the mother's well-being may require greater attention. This is a period to check property documents carefully. Look for registry gaps. Look for missing paperworks. Look at repairs you have postponed. And emotionally ask yourself whether your home actually feels peaceful or not, because you cannot continuously expand your external life external life while the foundation underneath you remains unstable. Okay. For Capricorn Ascendant, Saturn retrogrades to 3rd house. This is especially interesting because Saturn is your own sign lord. Okay. The 3rd house governs communication, courage, siblings, neighbors, short distance movements, and personal initiatives. So Saturn begins refining the way you communicate. Your words become part of your audit: emails, messages, contracts, conversation, and everything. Even your tone can carry consequences. Old siblings disputes may reopen. Boundaries issues with neighbors or close contracts may return. But again, the purpose is resolution, not endless conflict. If you are communicating professionally, double check everything before sending it. If there is a sibling dispute that has remained unresolved for years, this may be the period to finally address it maturely. If you feel that your communication skills are limiting your personal growth, this is an excellent period to formalize them through structured learning. Okay. For Aquarius Ascendant, Saturn retrogrades through the 2nd house. This is particularly important because Aquarius is approaching the closing phase of Sade. Okay. Right now it's in Pisces, so okay. So the major lesson becomes retention for Aquarius. You may be earning, you may have opportunities, but can you keep what you earn? That is the question. Your savings habits come under review. Your speech comes under review. Your family relationships comes under review. The way you speak to people close to you carries karmic weight during this period. So this is the time to cut one unnecessary major expense permanently, not temporarily but permanently. Build a saving structure that can survive difficult periods, and think about your financial life 5 years from now rather than 5 weeks from now. This is a kind of thinking Saturn rewards. And finally, like Pisces Ascendant. Okay. Saturn is retrograding through your 1st house. This make the transit intensely personal. Saturn is sitting in your own sign, and if your moon is also in Pisces, you are simultaneously experiencing the peak phase of Sadasati. This can create what I would call a productive fatigue. You may feel slower, more serious, more introspective, more aware of your limitations, but that doesn't mean nothing is happening. In fact, some of the most important restructuring of your entire life may be happening underneath the surface. Saturn is rebuilding your identity, your routine, your relationship with responsibility, your physical structure, your understanding with time. Okay, the key is not to resist every delay. Some delays are corrections. Keep one small promise to yourself every single day. Something simple or something non-negotiable. That is how Saturn is mastered. Not through dramatic transformation, through repetition, through consistency, through showing up even when motivation disappears. Because whatever you build under this kind of Sagittarian pressure can become the foundation of your life for decades. And that brings us to another extremely important layer of this transit, the moon sign. Because your ascendant tells us the environment where Saturn is operating, but moon sign tell us how you're experiencing it emotionally. And that is where, and this is where Sadesati and Dhaya becomes extremely important. If your moon is in Aquarius, you are, you know, closing the you are in the closing phase of Sadesati. Your major lesson is retention. You are learning how to hold what you have earned. You are learning how to manage speech. You are learning how to stabilize your financial foundation. The final, examination. This is not necessarily about earning more. It is about learning how to preserve what already exists. If your moon is in Pisces, you are in the peak phase of Sarasati. This can feel like the eye of the storm. Self doubt can increase, responsibility can feel heavier, progress can feel slower. But this is also where the deepest restructuring can occur. The fatigue itself is not unnecessarily a sign of failure. Sometimes it is the sensation of rebuilding. And if your moon is in Aries, you are entering the beginning phase of Sadesati. Okay, the lesson begins with outflow. Okay, energy, uh, money, attention, time. Okay, you need to understand where your resources are disappearing. The earlier you learn this lesson, the easier the later phase can become. Okay, for Leo moon signs, uh, Saturn influence creates Dhaya through 8th house. This brings attention to hidden debts, unresolved issues, and transformation. Okay, yeah. So unresolved issues and transformations. Now, for Sagittarius moon signs, okay, Saturn's influence operates through 4th house. Domestic peace becomes the door. Property, home, family, emotional stability. The message is simply fix the foundation. But Saturn never allows you to build a tower indefinitely while the foundation remains damaged. And this entire transit also carries a major professional message. Saturn is a planet of second chances, but Saturn's second chances rarely look glamorous. A missed job opportunity may return. A previous project may return. An old professional contacts may contact you again. Okay, a contract may be renegotiate. A role that you thought was permanently gone may suddenly become available. But when the opportunity returns, Saturn expects you to treat it differently. You cannot repeat the same behavior that caused the original failure. If you are careless about, become precise. If you are impatient before, become patient. Okay, if you ignored paperwork before, become meticulous. If you have spent everything you earned before, start building reserves. This is why Saturnian luck is slow luck. It is not the luck that suddenly drops millions on your account. It is a luck that gives you something you can still process 10 years later. And that is much more powerful kind of luck. The ultimate financial goal during this retrograde is not speculation, it is fortification. Build a fortress, create savings, reduce unnecessary liabilities, strengthen your financial structure. Because Pisces represents dissolution, and Saturn is asking you to create something that remains stable even when circumstances becomes uncertain. That is the challenge. That is also the opportunity. And as we move towards the final phase of transition, there is one more area where Saturn becomes particularly revealing: relationships. Because Saturn doesn't simply test whether two people love each other or not, it tests whether the relationship is sustainable. That is much harder question. Love can exist, but Can the relationship carry responsibility? Can both people respect boundaries? Can both people support each other without becoming emotionally dependent? Can they say no to any conversation? Can they or any situation? Can they communicate honestly? Can they survive periods where the life becomes difficult? These are the questions of Saturn. And during this retrograde, relationships can experience what I would call a commitment reality check. Old emotional issue can return, old arguments can resurface, but again, the appearance of the old issues does not automatically mean the relationship is ending. Sometimes the issue is returning because the relationship has reached the point where it can finally be resolved properly. Saturn gives you data. Okay, you decide what to do with it. And perhaps one of the greatest lesson here is learning that emotional boundaries are not the opposite of compassion. They are what allow compassion to survive. You can love somebody deeply without allowing them to consume your entire emotional world. You can help somebody without becoming responsible for everything that they experience. You can be supportive without abandoning yourself. This becomes particularly important under Pisces because Pisces can dissolve boundaries naturally. Saturn says keep the compassion, build the boundary, keep the spirituality, build but maintain structure. Okay, keep the dream but build the reality. And that is ultimately what the entire Saturn retrograde of 2026 is asking from us. Not to become colder, not to become fearful, not to stop dreaming, but to give our dreams bones, to give our spirituality discipline, to give our relationship boundaries, to give our to give our finances structure, to give our careers consistency, and to finally complete the things that have remained unfinished. Because the cosmic ledger is open, the Saturn is reviewing it. And question is not whether your life will be perfect during this 138 days or not. It won't. The question is whether you will use this 138 days to make your life more structurally honest or not. Because if you do, then the pressure you experience can become the stability you experience later. And that is the real gift of Saturn retrograde. So slow down now so that you can move forward with the confidence later. If you want to make free Kundli, visit the Cosmic Dharma website, link in the description down below. And if you want a personal consultation with me, you can DM me on Instagram. Okay, my Instagram ID is this one. Okay, you can the link is also in the description. You can DM me on Instagram. And yeah, Jai Shri Ram.